I'd rather create something that others criticise than create nothing and criticise others.
If you have high quality product behind the bar, it's like a weapon.
It's not about the figures, it's about who those figures are.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast.
I'm going to drink this beer.
Yeah, let's crack them.
With James Henderson.
Hello and welcome to episode 19 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Today, Dan Woolley, the National Whisky Brand Ambassador for Beam Suntory Australia, gives us a glimpse into the deep and wonderful world of whisky and his work as a brand ambassador. With a career spanning longer than the lives of some of our younger listeners, there's an incredible amount of value that he shares with us. Enjoy and cheers. Hello and welcome to the show, Dan.
Thank you.
No worries at all, mate. I like to start the show by asking, have you got a crazy hospitality story?
I have volumes of them, actually.
Yeah,
I could write not only a book, but different encyclopedias on stories.
I see.
First started in my dad's bar at the age of 11, going back well over 3 decades now.
Yeah.
You can imagine the kind of experiences, the kind of stories. Most of them are not presentable for children, I can tell you right now.
That's okay. We aren't a show for children, but that's okay. But I do want to delve into your background a little bit more. But first, to open the episode, with this crazy hospitality story, have you got anything that you've seen weird, wonderful, exciting that patrons have done while you've been in the bar?
Patrons. Well, one particular story that I can think of is not necessarily from a patron, but there was a bar that I used to be the general manager of back in the day, going back over a decade or so. We used to run some crazy Thursday nights. We used to have a midget. Is that PC? Can I say midget?
I think
dwarf?
It's PC.
Is dwarf? Or is one of? I know one of them's not allowed. I don't know which one it is.
Let's roll with it.
He used to come in and he used to get a little bit crazy and act up a little bit, and we used to pay him for about 3 hours. He would actually walk along the bar and pour people's drinks whilst walking on the bar. He did like a drink himself, and he was known to have quite a few drinks. And one particular night he got absolutely crazy and proceeded to take all his clothes off and
while
started
he's walking along the bar,
dancing naked on the bar to a packed bar. And it went down quite well. The patrons thought it was part of the show.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Eventually we had to actually get security to pick him up off the bar and remove him from the venue, at which stage he started to have a bit of a hissy fit meltdown, buck naked at the front door of the venue, that's when it started to turn sour. But, that was a pretty good story.
That is a great story. I really like that. Thanks, Dan. I'd like to know, a lot of people talk about why they do what they do. I'd like to know why you do what you do.
My entire life revolves around whiskey and has done for a very, very long time, spanning decades now. It is my heart, my soul, my hobby, my passion, my job, my vision, my dream. It's been everything for me for a very, very long time. So I consider myself to be one of the luckiest guys in the world, having the role that I do, getting to wake up every day and not really work. I mean, at the end of the day, there are little bits and pieces of admin that I really hate, as most ambassadors do, and I'm really bad at it too. So, it seems to be the bane of my existence, that 2 or 3 hours a month, which is, not really much, but never seem to get things in on time.
Yeah.
But for me, I don't really feel like I'm working unless I've got a bottle or a glass in my hand. So that's why I do what I do. It's a complete love, dedication and passion towards whiskey in general.
Yeah, cool. Well, before I ask what you do, I'd like to know what about it inspires you. What is it about booze that inspires you, about whiskey specifically?
With whiskey, I try and learn as much as I can. So I have a humongous volume of whiskey books. Must be nearly 100 whiskey books now, as well as online, reading lots and bits and pieces online. But for me, the best part about learning is travelling around the world. I've been to over 70 distilleries in Scotland, been to lots of distilleries in Japan, lots throughout the US, lots throughout Australia, just about everywhere that makes great whiskey. I've spent a lot of time at it. I've been fortunate and lucky enough to spend a lot of time working at these distilleries and rolling the barrels round and making the cuts of the stills and mashing and fermenting and, you know, just that kind of thing for me is a dream come true. And it's that kind of thing that inspires me. And I love the fact that I can learn 20 new things a day, every day, and I'll never know 10% of what there is to know. Some people would find that intimidating. For me, it's extremely attractive. I just love the way it is unlimited. The amount of information that you can find out about whiskey in general is just mind-boggling.
Crazy. It's always that the more you know, the more that you know you don't know.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's the same with whiskey. It's the same with rum or any booze or in any industry.
A lot of people don't realise that each one of these spirits are a world unto themselves.
Awesome. Well, Dan, tell us a little bit about what you actually do.
Well, good question. A lot of people think that I am a bit of a rock star and basically get paid to drink whiskey in the greatest places around the world. And
is that true?
Well, to a lesser extent, maybe. But part of the job is to make it look like that.
Okay, cool.
In reality, there is a lot of hard work involved. If you didn't absolutely love whiskey and you didn't have it coursing through your veins 24/7, then it would be ridiculously hard work, because I do work 5 up to 6 days a week, and each day I work 12, 16, 18 hours a day. If I'm not asleep or at the gym, I'm working. There's no downtime for me. Every time I go to a bar and I'm talking to bartenders, every time I am hosting a training with bartenders, every time I'm hosting an event, a masterclass, a tasting, a launch, a whiskey show, whatever it may be. There's no such thing as a typical day for me. In 3, 4, sometimes 5, even up to 6 cities a week. And I would say that my day, generally speaking, would be a combination of travel, training bartenders, and hosting events, as well as doing a lot of work with the brand where I come up with new ways, new activations, new launches, new concepts. So I do a lot of that as well.
So it's that creative thinking, that creative aspect to design new ways to activate and promote the brand.
For example, we have a masterclass that I'm hosting tonight, and I worked closely with a very good friend of mine, Michael from Salumi, Australia, based out of Byron Bay. And we sat down with a lot of whiskey and lots of different cured meats, and we proceeded to taste lots of whiskey with lots of different cured meats and come up with the best combination of pairings for specific whiskies and specific cured meats, which was a long afternoon. It was a pretty long afternoon.
That sounds like the dream for a lot of people. You know?
Yeah,
that looks like it sounds like the best job in the world.
Yeah,
and obviously you love it too, which is fantastic.
Yeah, well, for me, people don't realise, they think it's all a bit of a show until they actually meet me, talk to me, and have a drink with me, and they usually walk away going, Jesus Christ, he's literally walking whiskey.
Yeah.
I have it tattooed on my knuckles.
Yeah.
I basically have thousands of different... Well, in my collection, I have about 1,600 whiskies in my collection, and I've tasted over 2,000 whiskies, and constantly just... searching for the Holy Grail.
And do you take notes on all of them?
No. I used to.
Yeah.
I don't take notes on any of them.
Too many now. How do you remember them?
Thanks to my father, I do have a really good palate memory, with nose as well. So if you look at all the whiskies in my portfolio, I've nosed and tasted them hundreds, if not thousands of times. So I can basically, with my eyes closed and being hung upside down, I can recall any sort of nosing or tasting note from any of the whiskies from my portfolio, just from immersing myself in that part of the world for such a long time, and also spending a lot of time at the distilleries. As most people know, Laphroaig for me is it's like a religion, almost like a cult for me.
Right.
I've spent so much time there. I've been there countless amounts of time. I'm lucky enough to actually live with Mr. John Campbell, the manager and master distiller there, and spending so much time at the distillery, living inside the distillery on so many different occasions. For me, it becomes not even second nature. I don't even have to think about it.
Mm. You mentioned your portfolio a couple of times. How many whiskies do you have in your portfolio?
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're currently, at the moment, when you look at whiskey alone, we have multiple distilleries in 5 countries. So in Ireland, we have 2 distilleries. In the US, we have 3 distilleries. In Canada, that's a bit of a tricky one. We have a brand of whiskey that comes out of a distillery. In Scotland, we own a lot of single malt distilleries. In Ireland, I think I said Ireland, we have 2 distilleries in Ireland. What's the one I'm missing? Japan, of course. We have 3 distilleries in Japan as well.
Yeah, right.
So if you look at whiskey distilleries alone, just through those 5 different countries, I think we have 13 different whiskey distilleries in 5 different countries.
Yeah, right.
So it's pretty huge.
And so the brand that you represent, can you tell us a little about those guys?
Well, we'd be looking at brands such as Laphroaig, Bowmore, Auchentoshan, Ardmore, Yamazaki, Hakushu, Hibiki, Connemara. Then if we jump over the pond and have a look at American whiskies, Maker's Mark, Knob Creek, Basil Hayden's, Booker's, Baker's, of course the stalwart Jim Beam. A lot of people like to put Jim Beam down because they think that it's pretty much for a specific type of person. And when it comes to drinking lots of bourbon and coke, and especially RTDs, it's not necessarily something that I drink myself. Bourbon and coke RTDs is not what I go for. But if you look at some of the top end Jim Beams, if you look at the Double Oak, if you look at the Jim Beam Black Label, if you look at the Jim Beam Rye, these are whiskies that I love to play with, especially in classic American whiskey cocktails. They're really, really good.
Yeah, right. That's awesome. I'd love to uncover a little bit more as we go about, obviously about whiskey. This is your wealth of knowledge on whiskey. But I also want to know how you got into hospitality and what's kept you in the industry. Obviously, your love of whiskey, but what first attracted you to hospitality?
My father was a district court judge, and he also was the president of Sydney Game Fishing Club at the end of Wharf at Watson's Bay in Sydney there. At the age of 11, for me, every Friday night, Saturday night and Sunday night, he used to make me work in the bar. And the bar was, it was not so much an honours system, but because it was a club, everybody had their own badge with their own number. And there was a book with your name and the number there. And you just put a tally system next to people's names to work out who was drinking what, so that's how people paid for their drinks. And it was, for me, possibly one of the most exciting things that you could ever think of. For an 11-year-old to be working in a bar every Friday, Saturday, Sunday night was pretty incredible. And it opened my eyes to a lot of things.
Did you grow up too quickly seeing that?
I definitely grew up too quickly. There were a lot of things involved. The King's Cross probably had a lot to do with that as well. I was exposed to 3 gentlemen that really attracted me to whiskey in general, and their names were Jim Beam, Jack Daniels, and Johnny Walker. And 95% of the men that were ordering drinks in there were ordering Jack Daniels, Johnny Walker, or Jim Beam. That was it. There was nothing else. So I was really quite curious as to who these 3 guys were, and I literally at the age of 11 started reading all the little bits and pieces on the bottle, and I was really intrigued as to why people were so loyal to these brands. They were following them like almost like a religion. They were so dedicated to these brands. So that was, for me, that was the kind of beginning part where I really started getting into it. And it just grew from there. Yeah.
Where did you go from there? Obviously, we're condensing a long period of time into a much shorter space. But
about a decade later, I started working full-time in a bar. I started working first as a barback, then started working as sort of a barback setup manager of a venue, and then I worked for a solid 2 years before I actually worked in the bar serving drinks in a proper bar. And from there it became almost infamous. Some of the things that, a lot of people... I was the bar manager of a very infamous bar that was around for a couple of decades in Sydney, and there was a lot of mischief in that place.
Do you want to share the name of the place?
No, not really.
That's okay, no worries.
No, anybody that's listening and knows me will know where I'm talking about, but it was around for a very, very long time.
No problem at all. Well, I'd like to move on to the next question, Dan, which is, what are you learning about at the moment?
What am I learning about at the moment? I am specifically spending a lot of time learning about maturation, something that I've been fascinated with for must be close to a decade now. But I recently had time at a cooperage where I spent some time actually building my own barrel and learning how to build my own barrel, learning the differences between French oak, American oak, Spanish oak, the different flavours that they will give to the nose and to the palate, and also the colour of the whiskey itself. Learning about the different char levels and toasting levels and how they affect not only the flavour but the colour as well. And you can read as much as you like in a book or online, but until you're actually there doing it yourself, then it becomes really abundantly apparent right in front of you when your hands are actually on what you're talking about, what you've learnt about for years and years and years. I currently have quite a few different barrels of my own whiskey aging around Australia. So for me, the end game is to set up my own distillery in Australia, which will happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And all of this work that I'm doing at the moment is definitely building upon that and looking towards that and focusing towards the future.
I love talking about the future, and a lot of that comes up in the show. I'd like to ask you, do you have a mentor to help you work through these sorts of decisions, or sort of where you're heading, or have you had a mentor on your journey to help you get to where you are?
When it comes to bartending, I would definitely put someone like Jason Crawley up there as somebody that I really look up to and respect and admire for everything that he's done, not just for the industry but for myself as well. When it comes to whiskey in general, I have a lot of mentors. John Campbell would definitely have to be one of them, the general manager of Laphroaig. David Turner from Bowmore, Charles McLean and Alex Bruce from Adelphi. I spent some time working at McLean as well with those guys. Alistair from Ardmore, where I spent some time working with those guys as well. Lots and lots of people that I've spent a lot of time with, and I really am very thankful for the time that they gave me. They kind of love it because they get free labour from me, and I love it because I'm constantly learning.
Yeah. So how does that process take place with those mentors? Like, how do you learn from them? You said free labour, like...
Just working,
investing as much time as you can.
Yeah. Basically getting into the distilleries and getting my hands dirty, filling up barrels, rolling barrels, making the cuts on the stills, transferring liquid from barrel to barrel, transferring liquid from big metal tanks into big trucks as well that go off to be matured for blended scotches as well. So. Yeah, lots and lots of different things that I learn, about the different types of barley, the different types of ferment times that are going to give you different types of flavours, the different cuts that you make from the stills to inevitably determine what type of spirit you're making. Also, maturation, what type of wood. There's so many different contributing factors when it comes to maturation. So you look at what type of oak it is, what was in that oak beforehand, how heavy the char was, the size of the barrel, how long it spends in the barrel. Is it going to be matured in just one barrel, or is it going to be transferred from one barrel to another, or Is it going to be a marriage of different barrels? So there's so many different combinations that it is literally unlimited.
Crazy. Can you work out what it's going to taste like just by knowing those?
I can have an idea.
Now? Yeah.
I can have an idea, but sometimes an idea is just that.
Yes.
It's theory. When it comes down to actually doing it, it might not work. But there's no such thing as wasted product when it comes to whiskey, just wasted people pretty much.
Right. Tell us more about that.
Wasted people?
Yeah.
Well, you can't really work in the whiskey industry and not drink. You can't. You can't. You need to test the product. I don't care what anyone says. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be sideways, but you need to be able to drink. You need to be able to know exactly what you're talking about, especially if you're creating it. You need to be one with the whiskey. You know, you need to be proud. You need to say to people, I know exactly what this is because I made it. I put it into this barrel for this long and then moved it to here and then I cut it down to this alcohol strength and then you need to know exactly why you did everything, for what specific purpose, what reason, what was the end game.
Because it is your product.
Yeah.
I have a question from a listener, from Taco. He wanted to ask, so we've all heard stories about whiskey in the past, but he wants to know what's happening in the future. You know, what are the sort of innovative techniques that are taking place?
Well, there's lots of bits and pieces that are going on with Suntory. I think, personally, if you look at the big players, Suntory, if you look at William Grant's, these two companies have got absolutely humongous experimentation. William Grant's, for one, might have 20 different experimentations on at any one time, and maybe none of them will actually make it to bottle. Maybe none of them. I know for a fact, if you look at some of the stuff that we're doing with Mizunara, a native Japanese oak known as Quercus mongolica, we use that with Yamazaki. We use it with quite a few different products, and we also have other experimentation going on. We have a barrel that's being aged at the moment in Japan at the Yamazaki distillery, where the staves, the outside of the barrel, is American oak ex-bourbon, but the heads, the tops and bottoms of the barrel are made out of sandalwood, and it's something that no one's ever done before. So
how does that actually change things?
A lot.
Just with is it with the flavour or the
colour, the nose, the flavour changes everything.
Those elements that you mentioned a little bit earlier.
If you look at barrels in general, mankind's been using barrels for well over 5,000 years. It's only been the last 150 years or so that we've really been putting a big emphasis on the fact that it gives so much colour and flavour to different spirits, and of course wine as well. Wine was a very large part of working all of this out. With whiskey, it's only been the last 30 years that they've actually put this massive concentration and experimentation with the quality of the oak, how long it spends there, what it's going to be finished in, what was in there before. They really started concentrating on all of this. So before then, oak was being used as Tupperware. It was a place to store the whiskey. They didn't care about the quality, they didn't care about what type of wood, what it was made out of, what was in there before. They couldn't care less. But in the last just over 30 years or so, they've really been concentrating on the quality and experimenting in general. So that's something that I really love about the industry.
You mentioned there about oak. Was it only oak and prior to that 30 years ago?
No, there's a lot of Australian distilleries that are actually experimenting with different methods and techniques. If you look at some of the guys in Tassie, a friend of mine by the name of Peter Bignell, who owns and runs a distillery called Belgrove. He's a bit of a mad scientist when it comes to whiskey. He has a little farm distillery just outside of Hobart, and he, at the moment, is currently aging a whiskey that he smoked the malts with sheep shit.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he basically has at least a dozen different experiments going at the moment, and they're all completely different. You know, he's a mad scientist. Then another guy.
Have you tasted that one?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Well, what's it taste?
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Would I buy a bottle?
Yeah.
Don't know, but I'm sure people would.
Yeah.
I'm sure people would. Another really good friend of mine by the name of Timothy Duckett, who's also in Tassie, has a independent bottling company called Hartwood, and he is. Yeah, he's batshit crazy, that guy. He basically takes different whiskies from different distilleries throughout Tasmania and marries them together. He beats the shit out of it with a paddle, like a wooden paddle, and then he'll might move it into a different barrel and then, you know, maybe added something else, but he'll actually steer that flavour to where he wants it to go until he's really, really happy and proud of the product. Then he'll bottle it and release it. So, yeah, there's some very cool stuff going on.
What about actually making the process faster?
As in aging?
The aging process.
It's not going to happen.
No?
Yeah, it's just not going to happen.
Do you think that, because there are a lot of innovative techniques. I had a guest on the show earlier, one of the first episodes, who ages spirits very quickly. Do you think that could replace
how does he
aging,
do it?
or,
how does he do it?
He uses a process that, so he talks about esterification in the episode. He didn't let on too much about that process.
So for quite some time, a lot of people actually flavour their whiskey with wood chips. It happens in the wine world as well. Whether it's sawdust, whether it's chips, whatever it is. It is going to flavour the whiskey. Are you going to make whiskey? No, you're not actually making whiskey.
Okay.
Legal definition of whiskey is, for this country, must be aged in an oak barrel for a minimum of 2 years. If you don't do that, you're not making whiskey.
Okay.
I'm not necessarily saying that he isn't going to make a great tasting product. It might be great. It might not be great. It might be fantastic. It might be undrinkable. We don't know. And I am totally open to tasting it and giving my honest opinion. Will he be making whiskey? No.
Okay, cool. That's very interesting. Thank you for your insights there, Dan. I'd love to ask you what your number one industry resource has been or is at the moment.
Industry resource in regards to information?
I like to keep that abstract, so for you to interpret it whatever way you desire. So it could be a person, a book, a website, a magazine, could be literally anything. Could be the back of a bottle of booze. Whatever you
For me, I'm very lucky to be able to communicate with the distillery managers and the master distillers. So if there's something that personally I need to know, I can actually call them or message them or email them and get a response fairly quickly, which for me is fantastic.
What about something that listeners might be able to use to learn or grow or expand their knowledge on whiskey?
Personally, I think ambassadors are probably the best way that you're going to be able to find out, unless you can actually get to these distilleries yourself. And even if you can get to these distilleries, a lot of them have these sort of Mickey Mouse Disneyland tours where you're not really going to learn much. Most of the bartenders I know that'll go on these tours, they'll know more than the tour guides. So it's kind of a waste of time for a lot of them. So for people that spend a lot of time in the distilleries, if you look at Grant from Brown Foreman, who spends a lot of time in distilleries, and other ambassadors around the country that are lucky enough to spend time in distilleries in production, then that's where I would be getting all of my information from for bartenders.
Fantastic, thank you for that. For anyone who wants to be successful in hospitality, what advice do you have for those guys?
Keep working. Keep working. Just keep working. There's times that you'll get really downtrodden and, I can tell you right now, if it wasn't for whiskey, for me, I don't know personally if I would still be in hospitality. There's many times where I've wanted to leave hospitality because, let's face it, the whole expression, the customer is always right, that is a load of horseshit. The customer is not always right, as we know. Customers tend to get violent and aggressive and smash things and hit people, and the customer is not always right. Whoever invented that saying, I would like to actually have words with. So, you need to be very diplomatic in the way that you approach things, in the way that you approach everything. So my advice would be to find your passion, whether it be whiskey, whether it be rum, whether it be tequila, whether it be cocktails, whether it be wine, whether it be beer, whatever it is. Find out, work out what you love most about the industry and put your whole life into it.
I'd like to ask what your greatest challenge is right now.
I have a 6-year-old son, and he, apart from whiskey, is the biggest love of my life. He's the only thing in the world that I love more than whiskey. And I really love teaching him and watching him grow and watching him learn, and being with him every second is a gift. I love spending time with him, but it is hard work. It's challenging. It is incredibly hard. And I am the proudest father that I know. I absolutely love and adore my boy more than anything in the world. But yeah, it's hard. It's not easy. You know, at the moment I have a full-time role as National Whisky Ambassador for one of the largest whisky companies in the world, plus getting ready to open my bar in Byron Bay. It should be coming around about November. We're currently still tweaking things at the moment, plus aging different barrels around the country and looking at building my distillery, and then my son as well. So for me, I think
all that balance too.
Every day being me is a challenge. Yeah. Yeah, but
Yeah,
I love it.
fantastic.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
So I'm glad that you included some professional challenges in there as well, personal, professional. Yeah, fantastic. My last question for you today then, Dan, is what's coming next for Dan Woolley?
I'm about to embark on a journey next week to San Francisco, Kentucky, New York, Dublin, Glasgow, Isla, London, then back to Isla, and then back to Australia. I'll be away for a month. Then when I get back, I will be gearing up for the opening of my bar, as well as hosting masterclasses with special whiskies that I sourced from Scotland as well. So I will be working at a lot of the distilleries on Isla. I'll be doing some work with the guys at Bowmore and more specifically the guys at Laphroaig. I'm designing some cocktails for the bar there and training the bartenders up. So that should be very, very cool. I've got something in the pipeline which you'll see online over the next few months once it comes to fruition. It's very, very cool. And then my distillery coming in the next however long it takes, however many years it'll take me to get there.
Yeah, I love it. Sounds like you've got a very exciting time coming ahead.
Good times.
So I wanted to thank you very much for being on the show today, Dan. It's been awesome, and I'm looking forward to the whiskey tasting coming up very soon.
My pleasure, mate. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Enjoy the episode? Like us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram to stay in the loop at Hospopreneurs. Want to be a part of the show or know a hospopreneur? Send us an email, hospopreneurs@gmail.com. Interviewing creative and innovative minds in hospitality. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson.